Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reski.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. Tonight we have a very special guest joining us, a Christian author by the name of Bill Mowry. Bill, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing fine, Jim. Glad to be here.
It's so good to have you, Bill. Known you for so long, and so excited to talk to you about the latest book you've written. So I think our audience will really enjoy it. But before we do that, maybe just to introduce you to everybody, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe start with your testimony. Tell us how you came to Christ.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I like to tell people, Jim, that, and I realize this dates me. I usually tell people I'm a veteran staff person with the Navigators.
Okay.
And by veteran, it means I've just been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But so I like to say that when I started college in the late 1960s, I was giving my life to the three R's: revolution, rock and roll, and romance. And so, classic 60s guy. And somewhere in high school, I told God to shove off and didn't want any part of him and didn't want any part of his Bible. And in fact, my dad had become a believer in his early 40s, probably when I was about a sophomore in high school. And he'd take me to these gospel meetings. And I finally said, Dad, I don't want any part of this. And he said, well, what's it going to take, Bill, for you to read the Bible? And I said, well, I will read the Bible if you read this book. And he says, well, what's the book you want me to read? And I said, it's the autobiography of Malcolm X. And he never read that, and I never read the Bible. But
so that didn't quite work out.
And so when I got into college, I got involved with the Students for a Democratic Society, protested the Vietnam War, instruct classes, all that kind of stuff. But in my freshman dorm in college, it's at Bowling Green State University, I got to be good friends with a guy named Ed, and Ed and I shared a number of common interests: history and music and girls, and history and music and girls. But there's one thing we didn't have in common, and that was Ed was a Christ follower. And I had never met anybody my own age who not only claimed to be a Christian, but really tried to live the Christian life. And that caught my attention with Ed. And so we just had numerous conversations, and to kind of make a long story short, the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, I went home and I thought, I'm going to read the Gospels this summer. I never, I'd had the Bible read to me and at me, but I never read it myself. And so I read through the Gospels, and I thought there's something compelling about this man, Jesus. And I couldn't his words kind of lingered. I couldn't contradict him. There's a truthfulness about his life and what he taught. And I'd been through enough gospel meetings with my dad to know about the importance of placing my faith in Christ and how he died for my sins. So I knew all those basic things. And when I went back to college, my sophomore year, I met another friend of mine that, from my freshman year, connected in the dorm, and I noticed that his life had changed. And, his language had cleared up, and a lot of the magazines he was looking at, he tossed out. And I said, Joel, what happened? Your life's different. And he said, well, last spring, I invited Christ into my life. And it struck me because I thought, if Joel's life could change, maybe Jesus could change my life.
Oh, wow.
It was in late October of my sophomore year. So this dates me. This is 1969. I actually did the classic thing, knelt down by my bed in the dorm room. I was by myself, and I can't remember exactly what I prayed, but, the essence of placing your trust in Christ and asking for forgiveness. And it's not like, I heard angels sing and it wasn't a bolt of lightning. But over a couple of weeks, I noticed I think some things are happening. And I thought, I wonder if I've become a Christian now. So I found my friend Ed again, and I went down to his dorm and I said, hey, Ed, I think I've become a Christian. And I said, but how do I know for sure? And he says, well, are you reading the Bible now? And I says, yeah. And he says that, are you praying now? And I says, yeah. And he says, have you ever done this before? And I said, no. And he said, well, that's probably a pretty good sign that something's happened. And then he asked me this question, Jim, and I like to refer to this as a life-changing question. He said, hey, Bill, how about tomorrow after class, we meet in the study lounge and we read the Bible together. And that started this pattern of us reading the Bible together kind of every week. And so in that process, and again, Ed's just a regular guy, just like me, and same age, and so he wasn't this super athlete or anything, just a regular guy. And so over that time together, he taught me how to spend time with God in a quiet time. We memorized scripture together, taught me how to share my faith. And so, he discipled me, and I didn't really know that much about what was taking place. I just figured, hey, this is just what Christians do. And I discovered later that I think we met on Wednesday or Thursday, and on Mondays, Ed was meeting with the Navigator staff guy. And so in a sense, Ed was passing on to me what the Navigator staff guy was passing on to Ed. And that's really how I got involved with the Navigators. That Ed invited me then to this campus ministry, to this fellowship. And so, as I like to say, that so that the revolution was replaced by seeing that, boy, only the gospel can really transform people's lives in real, lasting ways. And instead of a rock and roll culture, I inherited Jesus's culture. And instead of being madly in love with a girl who I later ended up marrying, and God replaced it with a new love for Him. And so, but that's how I came to faith, and that's how I first got involved with the Navigators, and that's how I got my first taste for disciple making. It was all within about that 1 year period or so.
So now you mentioned the Navigators a couple of times, just for listeners that might not be familiar with the Navigators at all.
Sure.
Just describe the organization, because that's how I met you. And I'll talk in a second about how you and I came to know each other in a minute. But just tell people about the Navigators, and then maybe you could segue into what the organization is, and then how you became involved with them and your role with them.
Sure. Yeah, good question. The Navigators, we would say, is a non-denominational Christian organization. And I think our simple theme explains a lot, it's to know Christ and to make Him known, and then to help others do the same. And so that, Dawson Trotman, who was a founder of the Navigators, came to faith in the 1930s. And it's a long story, but he began a ministry among servicemen on the West Coast. And by the end of World War II, there were men trained by the Navigators, I think, on almost every ship in the U.S. Navy at that time. And Dawson's emphasis was, he called it follow-up, and today we call it discipleship. But how do you come alongside of somebody and help them be a wholehearted follower of Jesus, and men and women who are practicing some basics in the Christian life, that they're people engaged with the scriptures, or people who are praying, people that are having quality friendship and fellowship with others, and the people who know how to share their faith, and that there's this focus on obedience and application. And so it's kind of helping men and women do that, and then in such a way they can then help others do that. And so this movement of the Navigators began in the Navy, kind of spread to the college campuses, and of course, as men, and women, left the campus, went into, marketplace settings, whole variety of places. What I do is I work with churches and with pastors and helping them build intentional disciple-making churches. And so that's kind of a little bit of the Navigators. We have several, I don't know, maybe 1,000 staff around over 100 countries in the world, and ministering among, the military bases, college campuses, in the marketplace, in churches, in what we call the nations, at home, that is, refugees and so on here in the U.S. from a variety of nations, as well as a ministry overseas. So that's kind of a capture of the Navigators. And so I'm on full-time staff with them, and have been for 50 years now, and then investing with churches and pastors.
50 years, is that right?
Yeah, that is right. No, that's a long time.
So I should, it's
Well, I came on staff when I was 15, Jim.
Exactly. Well, that's how you and I met. So when I went to Ohio State, and by the way, let me just connect some dots for our listeners. So when Greg and I post recordings of a Bible study, we always refer to a Bible study that we're involved with, where we're speakers at this Bible study. It's not a small group Bible study with 6 people around a table. It's like 50 people in a room. And Greg will give a talk, and then we'll post it on this this podcast, and I'll give a talk. We'll post on this podcast. That Bible study itself is a Navigator Bible study. So it's a lot of our material for this podcast. But you and I met because when I went to Ohio State as a freshman, I got involved in Navigators as well, and you were my I would say my NAV rep, which stands for
Yeah.
Navigators representative, because you were the representative working at Ohio State. And that's how you and I got to know each other. And then I like to say, fast forward, my wife and I met at Ohio State. You officiated at our wedding as well. So
Yes.
really
Yeah.
appreciate that still. And so we have quite a connection. And I would say very instrumental in my discipleship and my Christian life. So I appreciate all that, Bill. I really do.
Well, thanks, Jim. As I did, a month or so ago, I did apologize for, it's kind of like, and yeah, it's, as you go along in life, you learn things, and the lessons you learn, you think, oh, I wish I would have done more of that or
Oh,
less
yeah.
of that back then. And so I feel like, it's just been a privilege to catch up with kind of quote unquote alumni like you and to see what you're doing and how God's using your life. And by the way, I've been using your statement about the most important question is the second question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. In fact, it's on my blog
I
post
think
this
I got
week,
that.
Jim.
This is circular. I think I got that from you, Bill. So I remember you, yeah, and it's in your book. So we're going to get to that. But this, as they could be a good question asker and asking two questions in a row, ask
Yeah.
the second question, teaching my kids that, so I was chatting with someone today who I said, what are you doing? He said, oh, I was at this fundraiser. I could have said, oh, that's nice. And so the
Yeah.
next one was, what was the fundraiser for?
Yes.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
disabled children. So I think I'm practicing a Bill Mowry.
Yeah, but you stated it, I thought, in a captivating way, Jim, that the most important question is the second question.
That's
And I
right.
thought that's a good, memorable statement that anybody can apply in any setting.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I love hearing and love capturing is, how do you create those kind of statements that are memorable to people and really capture an essence of truth and practicality?
Yeah. And there's things like that I remember, Bill, from your influence. And some of them end up showing up in this book. I don't want to jump too far ahead because I want to give a little bit of context to the readers about the book. And there was one thing in there, Bill, about a leader. It might have been the Ed you're talking about, but who just on a Sunday afternoon was just reading Philippians.
Oh, okay.
I
No,
love that story. And I don't want,
yeah.
again, you'll give readers the title of the book and the context in a second here, but I just love that because
Yeah.
it was almost like you're saying, so why are you reading Philippians? And you didn't say this in the book, but I could imagine this conversation. Like, are you preparing for a Bible study? Are you going to teach on it? Are you leading
No,
something? Nope.
no, he's a physician friend of mine.
Yeah.
And Bill, and he's actually been like a mentor to me over the years. He's 83 years old himself.
Okay.
So, and not that I'm 83, but Bill's 83. And he's just, I think, wow, Bill, just one afternoon, he kind of said, I'm just going to go through the book of Philippians. And he's describing how God met him in the book of Philippians. And for a large number of years, he didn't watch TV. And he's married, and he's a fanatic cyclist. I don't know how many hundreds of miles he bicycles every month,
Wow. Wow.
But Bill has this just an infectious love for God and just a very a joy. His key word is joy. And how do we bring joy? He's a researcher. He's an endocrinologist and a researcher at the Ohio State University Medical Center, and he spent his life studying the impact of stress on aging. And that would be another whole topic altogether.
Oh yeah.
And I've just learned so much from him. And part of it is you just appreciate his life. This is a real thing. This is a real deal for Bill. And to me, that's part of the older I get, and discipling people and investing in people's lives, you begin to realize how everybody has this unique story of how God's worked in their life.
Yeah.
Then the privilege, when you get involved with people, you realize I probably learn more from others than I hope in any way I might pass on to them. And so that it's just we get enriched, like our lunch, a couple of months ago. I still remember, and that statement, second most important. And so I walked away enriched by that. And that's part of the privilege, I think, of investing in people's lives.
Well, that story, when you wrote that, and I read in your book about, the guy the mentor figure who's just reading the Bible on a Sunday afternoon because he loves to read the Bible. I remember when I was in college and you said to me once, Jim, what do you read in your spare time? And I mentioned some things I was reading. He said, Jason, you really encouraged me. Just pick up the Bible and read it. Just read
Yeah.
it. Just read the Bible. Just,
Yeah.
great wisdom. So let's talk about the book. And so
Sure.
the book is called The Ways of the Leader, but this is not your first book, right? You've had a number of books published, right?
No, I had two books prior to that. One was on Nav Press called The Ways of the Alongsider, How to Disciple People Life to Life. And that's really kind of like a field guide, a training manual for relational disciple making.
Mm.
And that there are certain ways that should characterize how we disciple people. And again, the focus on it is that I guess one of my passions in life, Jim, is how do we deprofessionalize and, in a sense, simplify the Great Commission so that everyday Christian feels I could have a part in doing this.
Really?
So that's what I've tried to do with first with the Ways Alongside or on Nap Press. The second one is on Moody on Walk With Me, basic principles for everyday disciple making. And so the second one is more of a book. The first book is like a Bible study. Second one, I call it a book, something you read, but it's kind of capturing, in some ways, it's capturing stuff I wish I would have learned, 30 years ago
Yeah.
and about disciple making. But again, it's my whole goal is, how do we take disciple making out of the realm of the ministry professional, like a navigator
Yeah.
staff person, whatever, staff person in a church, whatever it is, that, hey, it's meant for everyday people like you and me to be able to disciple others.
It sounds so common sense. It sounds so real. It sounds so biblical. Like,
Yes.
and there's
Yeah.
so much of that's the model, right? Spiritual
Yeah.
multiplication. But just, I will tell you, I mean, just this week, Deb and I were talking about a church that was saying, here, the basic model is, let me tell you how you can bring your friends to church.
Yes.
And here the professionals preach. And so the whole push is get them into the building
Yes.
so they can hear from professionals like me, train people,
Yes.
because you obviously, and not even a hint that I want to help train you to do this with your
Right.
neighbors, because you'll
Right.
they didn't say this, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but the implication is you'll never get it right. You'll
Yeah.
never be able to do it. What's the point? Don't
Yes.
bother. Just bring them to me, and I will.
Yes.
The trained professional will take it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you say it, and I think in especially the Navigators are all about that spiritual implication. It
Yes.
seems so obvious, but in so many circles, it's not so obvious. They're
Yes.
they're in the trained professional model.
I know, and and that's what carried over into the book and the Ways of the Leader. That again,
Mm.
that I'm writing it for kind of what I call the everyday leader. This is a leader who doesn't have the corner office. He or she doesn't have multiple staff. They don't have a big research budget. They could be a pastor of a church of 2 to 3, 400 people.
Mhm.
They could be kind of like a neighborhood activist. They could be working with a parachurch ministry in some form. And but it's, again, my goal there is to I call it's easy to rely on. I call them intellectual mercenaries. And that, mercenaries, I'm paying somebody else to fight for me.
Oh, right.
Sometimes, and particularly in leadership, that we pay other people to think for us.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's by, we invite the best-selling author in, we go to the seminar, and we spend all this money on things.
Yeah.
And in a sense, we're asking other people to think for us as leaders. So my premise is, well, as leaders, usually local leaders are facing local challenges and they need to come up with local solutions or strategies. And anymore, we're realizing that one size doesn't fit all. And that so often when you have an expert come in, they're an expert perhaps in a procedure or in a place, but that may not describe my place and my
Yeah.
people and my issues. And so
Yeah.
then how do we give some basic skills for local leaders to solve the problems in a sense with the Lord and for themselves? Because local leaders know what's best for their local places and the local challenges they're facing. So the whole goal of this book is, hey, here's some tools in a sense for you to pursue the Lord and to practice some ways that will help you to come up with, as a local leader, local solutions for your local challenges. Because those are different than my challenges.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that speaks in the premise of the book. The major premise has all wrapped around wisdom.
Yes. Yes.
You know what? So we'll get to that in a second. But just to be clear for the audience, the book is titled The Ways of the Leader by Bill Mowry. Mowry, in case anyone's wondering, listening on audio. The subtitle is Four Practices to Bring People Together and Break New Ground, published by Nav Press. When was this published, Bill? Is it
I think it was about a year and a half ago.
okay? About a year and a half
Yeah.
ago. Okay. And then you just recently were invited to come to Africa.
Yes. Yeah. We were invited by the African Navigator leadership to come and spend a day, yeah, teaching on the principles of this book.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's reaching people and it's getting a response. So
Yes. Yes.
uh so that's great. So the book, just let's think about big picture. It's based on an illustration where wisdom is at the center. Maybe you want to
Yes.
describe that for people who are listening to us on audio right now.
Yeah. So that wisdom is the center. And let me do two things. One is maybe describe the need and why wisdom is needed. And so picture yourself. I'm not a tennis player, but my friends who are tennis players, they tell me about practicing and they go on the court and they load up the ball machine, right? That's going to pitch the tennis ball at you. And so you're sitting in your tennis stance and they throw that first ball at you and you whack it over the net. And then before you have a chance to reset, another ball comes at you. And you barely got time to hit that ball. Then another one comes at you, and then another one comes at you. And so these balls then flying at you, and you don't have time to reset. So you're madly scrambling. And for a lot of leaders, that's what life is like today. That we're just facing unprecedented challenges to leadership in a whole variety of ways. And we don't know a lot of times what to do. That there's not, this exact solution out there or one size fits all, the silver bullet idea. And so what we need is God's wisdom to, like I said earlier, as a local leader, we need God's wisdom to come up with local solutions for local challenges. And I like to think of wisdom. This is what's really helped me, Jim, as we look at the biblical picture of wisdom, that wisdom, I see it as wisdom is a skill to choose what is good and what is right. And so, like the word skill, wisdom, particularly in the book of Proverbs, can be translated as skill.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it this way, that you've, as a person in the financial industry, you develop certain skills about reading financial indexes, dealing with banks and so on. And with those skills have come wisdom. That's what people pay you to do. In a sense, they're asking for your wisdom on how to make choices. And that wisdom has come because you've developed some skills. And so in one sense, one way of defining wisdom is it's skillful living before the Lord. And so wisdom is a skill to choose what is good and what's right. And by good being, this is the goodness of God. And in the goodness of God, he wants to give people life and he wants to see people flourish.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to make wise decisions that help people, that gives people life and then helps them flourish. And so wisdom is the skill to choose what's good and then what's right. And so wisdom biblically is tied up in the righteousness of God. There's a rightness about it. There's a justice about it. There's a fairness about it. And so I want to make decisions then that are just and right for people. And sometimes those are hard decisions and, or hard standards, but they're coupled with the good.
Yeah.
Again, another way of picturing it, Jesus says that, in John 1, that he's full of grace and truth. And that's another way of picturing this, that, it's like with our children, that we want to have wisdom and how can we help them to choose what's good, what's going to give them life, it's going to help
Right.
them flourish, but also what's just, what's the right thing to do, what's the fair, the just thing to do. And
Yeah.
so that's, it's kind of, wisdom is that ability to have insight and understanding to kind of see through all the fog and say, well, Lord, in this setting, at this time, in this place, what's a wise thing to do? And so
Yeah.
that's the premise of the book. And then as I talk about this kind of four practices, or I call them ways, that helps to grow that wisdom. It's kind of like seeing wisdom. You've got a wisdom bank. And again, you're a banker, you'd understand this. So how do I continue to add to the amount of wisdom that's stored in my bank? And here's four ways so you can add to that wisdom bank to allow your wisdom to grow.
Yeah. So but before we get to the four ways, just I was thinking this as I was reading your book. I'm a big, huge fan of Tim Keller, and
Yes.
Keller had a great sermon series. Gosh, he probably preached in the late 90s, but it's available. Everything's available online for free. but a whole series on Proverbs.
Okay.
And he just picked out different Proverbs and just thematically went through it. And the big point he was trying to make is that wisdom is first of all, the Bible's got rules, absolutely, 10 commandments and a whole bunch of other rules,
Yeah.
right? But wisdom is for the 99% of life for which the rules don't
Yes.
apply.
Yes.
And I love the way you connect it to being a leader, because you say, look, and I'm glad you brought up the tennis ball analogy, because that's how you start the book, and right, it grabs you right there, and then it never lets you go, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I felt like you're exactly right. These tennis balls come at you, different decisions you have to make come at you, life comes at you, different situations come at you. So you can't just read a book that says, here's how to be a leader, do ABC. It's a cookie cutter approach, you'll be fine. And you can, or take this program to get this MBA, learn how to be a leader, and you'll be fine. No, you need wisdom to be a leader. You make decisions on the fly, because it's for the 99% of life for which the rules don't help you.
Yeah.
So that's great. What prompted you to start the book in the first place? Is this something that's been on your mind since you wrote the other book?
Yes. No, this is something, I guess, that a number of these themes, being a lifelong learner is one of the themes in there, being in ministry, a culture detective, ministry innovator, and a collaborative leader. These are themes, I guess, in ways that I've become convinced of over the years that are necessary for good leadership. And so I've just tried to apply those in a variety of kind of ministry settings. Because again, we're always thinking, how do you prepare leaders for the future? And you think about it, if you can help leaders just to be able to learn from life, if you can help leaders understand their context or their culture, helping leaders to see that there's wisdom in the community, how do I pull people together in a collaborative way? And then to say, boy, in a lot of cases, we need to do some innovative thinking, some fresh approaches. And how do you help people think innovatively?
Yeah.
The innovation is drawn from, understand the context, the culture around me. It's relevant to that. It's drawn from the wisdom in the community, and it's drawn from my learning experiences. And again, all that's wrapped up in the idea of wisdom. And so wisdom, it's not being innovative for innovative sake, but it's applying wisdom and saying, well, Lord, let me give you an eye. Can I go off on two little tangents here?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah. And then you could ask me about them. But one of the ideas of wisdom that we talk about, the Bible is very clear that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Right.
And I've thought about that. Okay, so what does that mean? And
Right.
I thought, and again, the classic definition of fear is a sense of reverence and awe. It's not fear in that I'm afraid of you, but it's fear in a sense of reverence and awe. And I think of it as coming up to the Grand Canyon. And if you ever seen the Grand Canyon, when my boys were little, we saw every major canyon in Colorado, and there's a mini Grand Canyon in Colorado, and we'd always take these boys, my boys there in middle school, and maybe your kids were like this, particularly the boys. You get up to the guardrail, right, and you're looking over, and they pretend to push each other over. Boys just do that. And my wife Peggy kind of grab them. I said, "Oh, they're just being boys." But you're looking at that canyon, whether it's a Grand Canyon or another one, and it's kind of like you're drawn in to get closer to it, right? Because it's so majestic and beautiful. And it's like you want to reach out and grab it, and you bend over and you look at it, and then you look down and you realize, wow, this is a long way down there. And it's almost like we automatically take a step back. Whether we do or not, there's like this reflex, take a step back, because I've come into contact with something bigger and more majestic and beautiful than I am. I'm so in awe of it, I kind of take a step back. And to me, that's the fear of the Lord. There's this majesty and a beauty about him, and I want to grab it all, but then I realize, oh, he's really different for me. And I take a step back, because when I realize in the fear of the Lord, it shows me how small I am in comparison to him. And that smallness, that I stand small before a big God.
Yeah.
There's a practical application of this, and it's a story told about Dawson Trotman. And when Trotman got converted in his early 20s, he got, like most guys, most young guys, right? They're eager for ministry. Where do they get involved at? Youth ministry, right? You were involved in youth ministry. Hey, he's a cool guy. Let's give him the high school kids. And so we give him the high school kids. And Dawson tells the story about these kids are just running all over him. He had no control, didn't know what to do. And he's in desperation. And this is recorded in his biography. He says that, Lord, you made little boys give me an idea, and how God gave him some ideas. And I thought, that's wisdom, is I realized, Lord, you made little boys. I'm standing small in front of God.
Mm-hmm.
You made little boys. Now give me an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And he's seeking wisdom on how to do that. And it's that spirit that we want to have in all of these kind of what I call the four ways, is that we're realizing, yeah, I'm kind of standing small before big God. Lord, you made little boys. He's the creator. Now give me an idea. And I'm waiting
Yeah.
on him to give me ideas. And here are four channels or four ways that can be, ways that he's going to give us ideas to kind of
Yeah.
get that challenge over the tennis net that he's throwing at me. So I kind of took a little sidetrack here, but I think that it helped me to. The other thing, Jim, is I realized my own sense of arrogance over the years in writing this book that I hadn't realized before.
Really?
That yeah, I look back on when I first came on staff, the Navigators. I had we then called them state directors, and this friend of mine, John Ed Robertson, would come and visit me probably about twice a year, come up to Bowling Green State University. And I look back on it and I realized I can never remember asking him a question. Yeah, a lot of questions.
Or the second one, let alone.
But I never asked him, and I thought, why didn't I do that? Because I felt I knew it all.
Yeah, it's funny.
I had this arrogance, and I
Yeah.
realized that that's been a part of my life for a lot of years. And I
Well,
wasn't standing small before this big God. And what I found in writing is a lot of ways, every book that I've written, I can look at this major lesson that God taught me through writing this book of what I realized about myself and what I realized about him.
in the process of
Ways.
writing,
In the process of writing, every book's taught
it's not
me.
like I got this great lesson God taught me, therefore I want to write a book. But actually, in the process of writing, this was
I learned something. Yeah,
wow.
of course, you start out writing
Yeah,
from what you've experienced and
yeah,
there's things you've gathered. But then I realized, wow, God really taught me something through writing this book that I hadn't realized about my life before. Because I
yeah.
think I think that particularly in writing nonfiction, the type of nonfiction I do, and to some degree that you do, is a lot of it, and very much so with your book, Jim. I call it biographical wisdom. That is, it's wisdom that's drawn from kind of the biography of our lives. We're extracting what God's done in the course of in the book of our lives, and so it's not in a sense theoretical. We're not trying to write a commentary in the Gospel of John. Other
Mhm.
people are skilled in doing that,
That's right. That's right.
and that's a needed form of writing. But a lot of what both you and I do is, well, we're capturing lessons that God's taught us in our life, and we want to write them in ways because we think, if I learned them and they've been helpful for me, maybe they can be helpful for somebody else.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
a steward of that experience, of that wisdom, and I want to pass it on. And maybe other people can be helped through my experience.
Right. And my failures, right? So
Yes,
like
yes,
things that took me, I feel like things that took me years to figure
yes,
out.
yes,
Like, can I help you with that? You can learn it. You can avoid all this pain,
yes,
and get things in a few minutes if we could just have a good conversation. And that took me years to come up with. And I love what you were just saying, just to not leave it so quickly. That tension between humility with Dawson saying, "You made little boys, help me to figure this out." Humility and arrogance. And I think as leaders, especially if you're given leadership young and early, and
yes.
especially if you don't have checks on that,
Mhm.
so and in the business world, if a lot of people say, I want to be an entrepreneur, run my own company, some of that, if you do that, you can get to a place where you haven't had someone give you a performance review for years.
Yeah, yeah,
And someone say, "Hey, you got some real problems. You gotta fix this. I'm frustrated with you. You got to
yes,
change."
yes,
If you can get yourself in a situation where and by the way, entrepreneurs aren't the only ones who are in that situation. Other people get in their roles like that in life too. Um, then all these things, these errors in your life can go unabated for a long time.
yes, yes,
And sometimes then God has to come and do a real corrective surgery
yes,
to kind of snap you
yes.
back.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.